Okay, this is your student notes, chapter 5, sections 6 and 8 on cell transport. This over here is a picture of, on the right, of a cell membrane. You can see the phospholipids. The phosphate heads are the circles, the phosphate tails are hanging off of them, and then you've got proteins that are spanning the membrane, other proteins that are going through the membrane. And we're going to talk about how stuff transports into and out of the cell through the cell membrane today. It says cell transport, moving substances into and out of the cell. Food and oxygen must enter the cell, and wastes must exit. The cell wall of plants is a non-living part of the plant. It contains large pores, so most stuff will just pass through without any kind of weeding it out. The cell or plasma membrane is the outer layer of animal cells and is just inside the cell wall of plant cells. This is what determines what can or cannot enter and leave the cell. Remember, it contains many small pores. The plasma membrane is called selectively permeable, and it allows only certain substances to pass through and prevents the movement of others. Small molecules like water, carbon dioxide, and oxygen can pass through pores. Actually, the water has to go through a special protein pore called aquaporin, but carbon dioxide and oxygen can pass directly through the phospholipids because they are very small and they are nonpolar. Large molecules like sugars and starches cannot pass without the help of the cell membrane. We'll talk about two types of transport, passive and active. The first type of transport we're going to discuss is passive transport. Passive transport requires no energy to be expended by the cell to move materials through the cell membrane. It uses the process called diffusion. Diffusion is the movement of a substance from an area of a higher concentration to an area of a lower concentration along a concentration gradient until equilibrium is reached. Generally, substances needed by cells are more concentrated outside of the cell, and therefore those substances move into the cell by diffusion, such as food or oxygen. Waste products are usually higher inside the cell than outside the cell, therefore they move out also by diffusion. Osmosis is a very special kind of diffusion. It is the diffusion of water through a semi-permeable or selectively permeable membrane from the higher water concentration to lower water concentration until equilibrium is reached. Direction of osmosis depends on the concentration of solutes, which is the dissolved stuff inside a solution, and therefore water on the two sides of the membrane. Depends on the concentration of solutes and therefore the concentration of water on the two sides of the membrane. Higher solute means lower water concentration. In a hypotonic solution, the concentration of solute is lower, therefore water is higher. So over on the right, I have a picture of red blood cells. Red blood cells that are in a hypotonic solution, the water will rush in because there's less solute outside than in, therefore more water outside than in, and it will cause the cells to expand and maybe eventually lyse or go through lysis and burst. I have cells in a hypertonic solution pictured here as well, and it causes the cells to shrivel. So in a hypertonic solution, the concentration of solute is higher and the water is lower on the outside, so water will leave the cell. And in an isotonic solution, the concentration of the solute and water is equal. I've jumped kind of ahead with my picture. But cells in osmosis. Plant and animal cells have different methods of dealing with osmosis, or the inflow and outflow of water. Animal cells can explode too much in the hypotonic solution, or they can shrivel up and die with too much out in a hypertonic solution. Vacuoles can store and pump excess out. In a paramecium, it has a contractile vacuole, and it will actually open up and fill with extra water, and you can see it pumping in and out if you ever get a chance to view paramecium actively under a microscope. It's really cool. In plant cells, however, Plant cells are protected by the cell wall to prevent bursting, and the vacuole can store water to prevent drying out. So when the vacuole is full, it pushes against the cell wall and it holds the plant nice and straight. However, when the plant has used the stored water, it may wilt or shrivel until water is available and the vacuole will expand. So the cell membrane will pull away from the cell wall, causing the plant to kind of fall over and wilt or shrivel, but it will quickly fill back up again as soon as water is available. Other types of diffusion include facilitated diffusion, which is where proteins carry material such as sugar across the cell membrane. I have another picture here, or I had one, of the different types of diffusion. You've got passive diffusion, which is such as water, carbon dioxide, and oxygen. And actually, water is not really passive diffusion. Water is a type of facilitated diffusion, osmosis. You have selective facilitated diffusion as well, and those types of diffusion have to use the proteins to carry materials like sugar or sodium or potassium. Those are actually pumped. Better example would probably be calcium across the cell membrane. If they are too large to diffuse through the pores, movement is slowed down or is still down the concentration gradient. Therefore, no energy is used by the cell. As long as things are moving from high concentration to low concentration across that cell membrane, it's going down the gradient and the cell will not have to use any energy. Ion channels use diffusion, which is what I was talking about, to help ions, with diffusion proteins, to help ions such as sodium and potassium and chlorine move into or out of the cell along the concentration gradient. Again, no energy is required, therefore it is still passive. So in both the types of facilitated diffusion with ion channels or with the glucose channels, which allow big things to get in and out, it does not require energy because you're moving down the concentration gradient. In our next video, we will talk about active transport.